Hello, and welcome to the second day of the Action Research in ELICOS Colloquium. I'm Sophie, and I'm the Professional Development Manager at English Australia, and I'll be introducing today's presenters. So the Action Research in ELICOS Colloquium is an opportunity for participants in the English Australia Action Research Program from 2021 to share their research with the wider ELICOS community. And all of the research projects this year were about our research theme of exploring new ways to assess learner progress. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the Action Research in ELICOS program partner, Cambridge Assessment English, who run the program in conjunction with English Australia. And now I'll introduce the first presenter for today, Rose Harvey. Rose is going to be talking about her Action Research project, implementing an integrated skills test in a direct entry program. Over to you, Rose.
Hi everyone. My name's Rose and I work at the English Language Centre at Macquarie University. My presentation today focuses on an action research program around the implementation of an integrated skills test in our direct entry program. Just a little bit of context, when I started this project, I had a partner and he left partway through to retire. So I sometimes go in and out of we and I. So sorry if that's confusing for anyone, but that's the reason why. Sorry, one sec. So in early 2021, the assessment team at Macquarie University started asking questions around the end of course assessment that we had in direct entry, and wondering if there was a way that we could more accurately and more effectively assess English proficiency before students went on to university. Ultimately, it was decided that we would change and introduce an integrated skills test. So just some context about our direct entry course. Direct entry is a 10-week course and it's a pathway for entry to tertiary study. It prepares students for university by developing their English and academic language and literacy skills. The delivery that this project focuses on was from May to July of this year. There were 4 classes with 18 students in each, and all classes were taught online. The project focuses only on the end of course assessment, so all other assessments in the course remained the same. Previously in direct entry, the end of course assessment had been 3 separate tests. There was a discussion essay and IELTS style listening and reading tests. The new integrated skills test was one assessment in which students read a short text, listen twice to a short lecture, and then write a discussion essay using Harvard referencing. For all these assessments, the questions and texts were based on content that was taught in the course. I'll just show you an example of one of the questions for the new integrated skills test so you can see what students would see. So they would be asked to read a passage on, for example, tourism, and then listen to the lecture, use their notes from the reading and lecture to answer the following question, which would ask them about benefits and limitations of tourism, and they'd have to give their own opinion in the conclusion. So all of the questions follow that structure, just the topic would change. So my partner and I, when we heard that this new integrated skills test would be introduced, we thought that it was a really great opportunity for research, particularly because of the newness of this type of assessment in the ELC. It's not something that we have done before. So this change in assessment, we thought it was a great opportunity to look at the stakeholder perceptions of this form of testing, as well as study the process of implementing a new assessment task, because that type of learning could be transferred to other assessment tasks or other new forms of curriculum that we may introduce. So these are my research questions, but in today's presentation, I'll primarily focus on the first 2. So how key stakeholders view integrated skills testing as an assessment of English language proficiency, and how the ELC or any institution can best support teachers and students during implementation. The last question I focused less on, the impact of the test on the classroom. And I'll explain a little bit about that when I talk about some of the feedback that we got from teachers prior to the start of the course. So our data collection had various elements. To begin with, we undertook a course content analysis because this assessment was going into an existing course. So we wanted to know what already existed and what activities we needed to develop to help students prepare for the new assessment. We did focus groups and interviews and surveys with the different stakeholders in order to understand their views and perceptions of integrated skills testing. And after the course, I did a marks analysis where I compared the feedback and final task results. This was for a couple of reasons, including to look at how the feedback task helped the final task, but also to see if what I had done in the course content analysis and in changing the course supported students to take the test in the end and supported teachers to deliver the content. So I'll start going through the findings, and I'll start with the course content analysis. This was when my partner was still with me, and he actually did the bulk of this. So what we did, we looked at the course content and we looked at the assessment task, and having spoken to teachers, we looked at what lessons we had and what we needed to add. And we decided that the new skills that students would need more of that perhaps hadn't been addressed when they were preparing for a different type of test were lessons around listening, in particular, identifying main ideas and details, note-taking, paraphrasing, referencing, and summarising. So we added in either new lessons, new parts of lessons, or adapted lessons to increase the focus on these skills, both to help students prepare, but also so that teachers didn't have to spend a large amount of time preparing extra content to best support their students. I then also spoke to the assessment team. I was really keen to find out the rationale behind the change in test and why this particular type of test had been introduced, both from a research perspective, but also so that this could be communicated to the teachers and to students around why this type of testing was beneficial. The main reason for the implementation of the new test was a desire for a more valid and practical form of test that holistically tests the students' English language skills and also tests the skills that they develop in the course, so their academic language and literacy skills. And the assessment team believed that integrated skills testing has more cognitive validity because of the mental processes that the students need to go through when they use their skills in combination. It's also more reflective of how students use their language outside the classroom, and also how they'll use it when they go to university. There were also concerns around academic integrity with discrete item tests. These had increased since going online, and despite robust academic integrity policies and testing procedures, there was concern that students were transcribing or were able to share answers, and with a multiple choice test, there's no way to check if an answer has been shared, unlike with an integrated test. Coupled with this was the time for test development of discrete tests. So the reading and listening tests can be quite laborious to develop for the assessment team. So after talking to the assessment team, I spoke to two groups of teachers, one group who were not teaching on the direct entry course and one group who were teaching on the direct entry course. I was interested to find out their views and experience with this test. And it's the result of these focus groups that changed the course of the research, because some of the feedback that we got was quite unexpected. So the initial focus groups with teachers showed quite a high level of stress around the implementation of this test. Not completely unexpected that change can cause stress, but it was the level that was surprising. So none of us teachers had taught on a course with an integrated skills test before. We'd always been teaching with discrete item tests, and there was this level of fear and anxiety. The reasons for this included a belief that it would increase academic integrity breaches, so the opposite of what the assessment team had thought, a belief that there was not enough paraphrasing and referencing skills in the student cohort, and that they would struggle with this, particularly in a testing environment rather than a take-home assessment. And primarily that low language level in one area, and the main worry was listening, would cause students to fail the test and therefore perhaps fail the course and not go to university. So this level of worry that the teachers presented was quite concerning, because it really showed that the teachers cared about their students. They were invested in their learning and in seeing the students progress to their tertiary courses. And I didn't want to see the teachers going through this level of stress for the last 6 weeks of the course. So with the assessment teams, we worked to put in some interventions to help lower this. These included a video from the associate director, access to journal articles, meetings to talk about the rubric, as well as extra support around marking. And all of these worked mainly to help communicate the rationale of the test, but also to help teachers see that students wouldn't be unfairly failing because they didn't understand a small portion of the test. Because I think the fear from a lot of teachers was having a really high number of fails of students in such a high stakes course. Luckily, these interventions, as well as the process of going through the course, seemed to have worked, and teacher feedback had changed by the end of the course. Concern around weakness in one skill area had decreased. Teachers could see, particularly after the feedback task, that students weren't unfairly failing. It would be expected that weak listening or weak reading would impact the grade, because we are looking to holistically assess all those skills. But just because somebody missed part of the lecture, that didn't mean that they should be failing the whole test. And teachers could start, and students as well, could start to see that that wasn't happening. There were a lower number of academic integrity breaches. Teachers said that students weren't trying to find other sources. And one of the reasons for this, and a comment we had from lots of teachers and students, is that what really stresses them out when writing an essay is thinking of ideas quickly on the spot. And with this, they could use input from the reading and listening and didn't need to think of ideas. Teachers also thought that it prepared their students for university much better than the discrete tests. In terms of practically throughout the course, teachers greatly appreciated contributing. They liked that they could make comments on the rubric and the task, and that this was listened to. They found the feedback task key to lowering concern around the test. And students said that as well. There were some comments around the format of the test. They found the time the test took to be quite lengthy and would have preferred that there could have been a break. They also thought it would be better if students could print the readings so they could highlight and annotate, but this is very difficult to monitor and allow when students are taking the test from home. And they thought the marking was quite time consuming. It would be expected that it's more time consuming than previous discussion essay, but we're looking to make teachers more aware how they can mark and take that load. The students had a similar process to the teachers. Now, I didn't survey the students at the beginning of the course. I was going to, but after the teachers showed such concern around the test, I thought this might add to everybody's stress. So I only surveyed the students at the end of the course. They did, however, and report that they were quite stressed when they found out about the test. And the teachers reported that their students seemed worried as well, their reaction and the questions that they asked. Keys to alleviating this stress were the feedback task, the extra practice, and understanding the rationale as to why they were being tested in this way. But most importantly, I think, was that the teachers made a real effort to support the test. And a number of teachers said that even though they felt concerned, they made an extra effort to not pass this on to their students. And through that, students actually came to really value the test. We even had one student say it was their favourite test that they've ever taken in their life. And the vast majority of students had never taken this type of test before. So nearly all the students believed that it was a suitable way, believed that it was a suitable way to test skills. No one disagreed. But So they can see that this is testing their all-round ability and their holistic English skills. They can see that writing, reading and listening are all tested together. So they really valued that as a way to test their skills. They also saw that the test was useful for their preparation for university study. So again, all agreed, or neither agreed or disagreed, that it will be useful for them, both the learning and the activities they prepared and actually doing the test will help them at university. I also did a marks analysis of the feedback and final tasks. So happily, all the students improved their marks overall from feedback to final. We had a higher number of passes and distinctions in the final than in the feedback. I was really interested to see if that fear around listening that we had really impacted the marks, and it doesn't explicitly seem so. So I would expect if a student was not really understanding the listening, then task achievement and development would be impacted, but we didn't see high numbers of fails in those areas. These are the 4 areas that we saw the highest number of fails within the section of the rubric. So in the introduction and conclusion, which I think was completely unexpected, language accuracy, which is a common theme across all our writing assessments, and then attribution and in-text referencing, which the teachers had predicted would be an issue at the beginning. What this means is now moving forward, we can look for the next delivery to make sure that we're addressing these areas enough in the activities that we provide for students to complete, and that perhaps we don't need to add in a lot more listening activities. Perhaps it's better to spend that time on language accuracy or attribution and essay structure. So moving forward, what we've learned and what this means for us has impacts on how we do the next delivery. So when we teach the integrated skills test again, but also impacts whenever we introduce a new assessment task. So I think the biggest learning is that changes to assessment can cause stress for teachers. And this may seem obvious, but the level of stress that was quite hidden until the focus group was really what was the surprise. I think it was especially true because this was an unknown or new assessment task for the centre. And also we've come through a period with such excessive amounts of change and stress, and teachers are just tired. And so that stress can be a little bit overwhelming. Moving forward, what I think this shows us is that we need really clear communication and explicit communication as early as possible when new assessments are introduced, and an explanation of the rationale behind the assessment change and choice of assessment to make teachers feel confident. I think also the areas in which students struggle can sometimes surprise us. I think we had all thought that students would really quite struggle with listening, and that would really impact. But as I just showed you, it was actually other areas. So now we'll be able to look at our course content and the extra activities that we do and see if we can help students in those areas. Overall, in relation to the integrated skills test, teachers and students see value in integrated skills testing. They view it as useful for skill development, useful for university, and they also seem to enjoy it. A number of students and teachers commented that preparing students for this test enlivened the course because it brought in such a new way of teaching, and that they were really grateful for that, and that it allowed different types of activities than we'd been able to do before. One thing that we also need to try and integrate into the course is some extra practice, as teachers and students have asked for this. Now, it's difficult, actually, I should probably say it's impossible to add another full task with feedback due to class time, marking load. But we can try and look at adding small practice activities throughout the course that test the different skills, or perhaps adding a take-home task with a model, or looking at self-access material. So that concludes my presentation on the integrated skills test. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much for that, Rose. So we do have a little bit of time set aside for questions. So if anyone has questions for Rose, please do pop them into the Q&A box. Okay, there's a lot of really positive comments in there for you, Rose. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions. Oh yes, we've got one question. So Sandra has commented that your study was so comprehensive, Rose, and a huge amount of work. Her question is, what advice would you give other teachers thinking of doing the English Australia Action Research Program now that you've experienced it?
I think one of the things that I would say is don't be afraid to change what you were initially planning if you need to, whether that's because something unexpected happens, either someone retiring or getting something through the data that you weren't expecting, and that necessitates a change. Change as you need to. And also, I think don't worry if your project isn't going at the same speed as other participants. I know with mine, just the way that the courses aligned, I didn't start till quite late, but it's all kind of come together in the end. And I would also recommend that if you're thinking about doing it, that you do apply, because it's been really valuable professional development and really, really valuable to work with so many other experienced teachers.
Yeah, thanks, Rose. I think that's really great advice. It actually reminds me of something that Anne Burns, who's the key academic reference person for the program, always says about action research, which is that you don't know what you know until you know it, which is why action research is so great, because it does allow that flexibility for change as you discover more throughout the research. And
yeah,
that's exactly what happened with you as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, well, great. Thank you again, Rose.
Thanks, Sophie.
And we'll move on to our next presentation for today. All right. So next up, we have Sue from the University of Western Australia Centre for English Language Teaching. And Sue's going to be talking about her project about creative writing and assessment. Thanks, Sue.
Well, thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Rose. Well, welcome everybody to this presentation on formative speaking assessment, beginning with story. Well, my name is Sue, as you know, and I work at the University of Western Australia as an English teacher and as a tutor. The research I'm going to talk about took place at the Centre for English Language Teaching earlier this year. So in terms of my research aims, I wanted to look at how we could implement a formative speaking assessment to replace a final exit interview style speaking test. And to do that, I was looking at how creative writing could play an instrumental role in this. The idea was that I would create opportunity to develop speaking fluency throughout the term, the 5-week term of the research cycle. This creative writing would be essential because it would be the foundation step and the groundwork for the rest of the scaffold. Ultimately, the aim was to give learners ample opportunity to voice their experience. So why creative writing? Well, for anyone who loves stories, we already know it reveals culture, and it gives a personal landscape to where we are. Creative writing motivates people to voice their own experience, and that's achieved by sharing whatever we want to achieve, whatever we want to share, excuse me. So how did I know this? Well, I kind of knew it initially because I participate and have participated in a number of writing groups, certainly since I came to Australia 9 years ago. But in addition to that, I was given an opportunity to start a free writing workshop at the university, at CELT, the Centre of English Language Teaching at UWA. And there, a space was provided for creative writing, and students were able to come from CELT, and this was a free workshop. So people came with no agenda, they just came to write. The focus for this research changed over the course of my action research. And in the end, I settled with this. I wanted to know how creative writing could engage the learners in this process of formative speaking assessment. This was important because it was so easy to get lost in ambiguity, and I often did. So to keep going back to story was important. So this research took place earlier this year over 2 5-week terms. And as you can see from this table, I've labeled them cycle 1 and cycle 2. And I'll give some more information about that in a moment. But what is important is that at this time, we were still providing face-to-face classes. And I was blessed in that I had a level 4 intermediate class, both in term 4 and in term 5. It was a small class. I mean, the total cohort was 10 students, 7 in the first and 5 in the second, with 2 completing both cycles. As you can see, the age range is quite wide, but I think the most important thing here, in terms of my understanding of the work, is the rich diversity of the students themselves. Predominantly female, but at the same time, we had very different accounts of this experience. So if I can just tell you a little bit about the action research cycles that I chose to adopt here. Well, as I said, I have 2 cycles with different creative writing themes. So the first cycle was my language journey, and that was the prompt that the students were given initially in week 1 to do some writing. And then in the second cycle, I changed the theme, I should say. I changed it with the help of the students guiding me as well. But anyway, the second cycle was about arriving in Australia, something that, you know, was key to most of us at that point. So as you can see on the left of this image, there's a lovely collection of papers. Some are handwritten, most of them are handwritten, and some are text. Now, the ones that are text come from cycle 2 because, believe it or not, week 1 of cycle 2, we went into lockdown here in WA. And of course, that for me was really indicative of the scope of creative writing because it seemed to work just as well. And the students were engaged at this point of the research online as well as face-to-face. So going back to the reason why I changed the theme of the cycles, I simply needed to provide variation so that any continuing students had a chance to write about something different in the first instance and then experience the process in a more varied way. Also, it gave me a wider perspective on the potential of creative writing. So the cycles themselves have much in common. The main thing they have in common is the organization. And as you can see here, there are 5 weeks of activities. I chose 1 day a week to do this action research. And on that day, each of the 5 weeks, something new happened. In the first week, it was always going to be the creative writing, which started with a mind mapping activity to generate ideas. In cycle 1, the students started straight away with their recorded speaking reflections. This was a first for all of the students. They would record their responses to some questions about the experience onto the voice memo, and they would email that to me. That became a little bit of a theme. And in the second week, you can see that we also have this RSR, this recorded speaking reflection happening again here. In the second week of the research, in both cycles, we have something called timeline, and that is where the students are using the creative writing to build a structured understanding of time and experience. In cycle 1, after that, they actually wrote a paragraph about that, and then they did the speaking reflection. Moving on to week 3, we're moving closer to assessment time, but in week 3, the students had time then to use the timeline to build their presentation slides for the actual presentation. And it was at this point that I noticed most of all that the students were really driving their own cars in terms of their own process on not only working towards the assessment, but also selecting the material from the timeline, which was relevant to them, what they wanted to share, because a lot of information came out of this timeline process. And finally, in week 4, the actual presentation, there was time for practice first, and then the assessed presentation took place. In cycle 1, the students did it in pairs, apart from one student. This changed in cycle 2, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But in cycle 1, when the students obviously presented with stress, as we all do when we're presenting, but when they watched the videos of these actual presentations, the responses from that were just, what's the word? They were just outstanding. They really made me understand the impact of such a process. In week 5, we had time to reflect as a group. The students interviewed one another and did another speaking reflection. And then we had a group discussion, which I really just recorded, and the students spoke together about the whole process. So when I show you cycle 2, I'm not going to talk in so much detail about it because it's pretty much a similar thing. The main difference, of course, is the way that the students reflected their practice. So in week 1, of course, we have the mind mapping, the creative writing. This time I introduced a survey to let the new students voice their opinions about the journal writing that was going to come. There was a speaking reflection in the first week, but from the second week and in the third week, the speaking reflections were replaced with a journal writing reflection on the activities of that week. So in the survey from cycle 1, I hope this is not too confusing, but in the survey from cycle 1, what was great was that students put down those areas that they felt uncomfortable with, or it had brought a level of confusion. And some of them had said that the timeline in the first cycle was a little bit difficult because they felt they didn't have enough experience to write about their language journeys. So this was indicative for me in how I was going to devise a timeline for the second cycle. And I'll show you that in a moment too. So week 3, again, we were presenting, the students were preparing for the presentation, much peer discussion going on during this time, and again, journal writing. Again, in week 4, we have this big day of assessment whereby the students are bringing it all together. They have a practice session first, and then journal writing again at the end. Once again, the presentations were recorded and the students were surprised when they viewed those. In week 5, a survey was completed for cycle 2, plus a group discussion and the recorded the interview. So pretty much the same organization. Let me talk a little bit about what the students actually did. So creative writing and the task itself was was very, as I said before, it was the foundation springboard for this formative speaking assessment. And the first thing that we did was that we put, and I say we because I did it as well. I wasn't observing, I was participating with the students in this process, this creative writing process. So the first thing was to do a mind map. Many students hadn't done mind maps before, and certainly not in English. So the mind map itself was there to give the ideas of maybe where this writing may go, but at the same time it was just in the moment for students to start. So 5 to 10 minutes we had for that, and then free writing. The students knew that this writing would not be assessed. Sue's not going to check any grammar or punctuation, spelling or anything. It was purely their thoughts coming to paper. So from that, in week 2 came the timeline. And as you can see, this is the timeline that I mentioned before. It's pretty standard in the way that it looks. It has 3 columns, and the students write down their information. From that, the presentation slides are born. But of course, clearly, they're not really born from that. They came much earlier than that. It's building all along. In cycle 2, when I got the feedback that the timeline in the first cycle had been a little bit difficult, I looked at it and thought, how can I help? So I broke down this timeline into 4 sections. The theme was arriving in Australia in cycle 2. So I wanted the students to feel comfortable writing about their experiences, about how they felt, about what they did. I tried to put in some sensuous detail here about what did they see when they arrived, what did they hear. And as you can see, you probably can't see in detail, but this student has written in depth about her experience, and it's just such valuable information, not only for me as a teacher, researcher, but for the student herself, who was able to create slides that brought this together, but did not reveal what she didn't want to be revealed. So in order for me to explain this as well as I can in terms of the assessment, I've chosen the 2 students who completed both cycles, and I've named them student 2 and student 6. And what I've done here is that I've produced the the criteria for the speaking assessment that I used, and showed the scores for each area for both cycle 1 and cycle 2. What's interesting is that 4 out of 5 of the areas, both students improved. In fact, overall, student 2 improved by 13% and student 6 improved by 16%. This is remarkable if we just want to focus on scores. And of course, I don't want to just do that. But the learning progress, we can attribute, or we could attribute it to this continued reflective practice throughout the 10 weeks and the increased occurrence of experiencing sharing. And as you can see, student 2 here has summed this up by saying that for her, each piece of the work was important. Oh, excuse me. So I'm aware of time here, so I won't go on, but let's move to the findings, my findings here. Well, clearly creative writing is going to engage learners, and it did in the right environment. This environment proved constructive also in the timeline building, which was kind of used, not kind of, it was used to build those slides for the presentation. The timelines, according to the students, gave them a lot of opportunities to talk about their experience. The framework that the weekly task provided gave the learners themselves a way in to evaluate their own progress. And this was seen in the survey as well, in the things that they referred to in relation to progress. I think it's the reflective practices that give such rich information about this formative speaking assessment. They not only talk about the good things, they talk about the confusing things, and they talk about the results. The energy that was demonstrated in the actual assessments and the responses from the classmates, the applause, etc., was so energizing that I think in the following week, when we had our group discussion, this global interest was still present and informed discussion was taking place. Yeah, and the surveys revealed much more. The process was positive. In cycle 2, 100% of the students said that they were, that the process was, I can't remember the word exactly now, but it was something like highly something, but it was very, very positive. What a great English teacher I am for saying that, but anyway. So the final group discussions, the important thing is here, they were insightful and they were open. I cross-referenced all this with Donye's conditions for promoting motivation. Well, some of his conditions, there were so many, and I actually did cross-reference most of them. But here I chose a selection to share with you today. Yeah, the evidence in the data analysis points to engagement, learner engagement in all of the tasks. The students were active in promoting this group cohesiveness. They were promoting it, creating an environment conducive to learning. The presentations themselves were encouraging, and of course they were stressful initially, but at the same time they were inspiring. They were giving pictures of countries that other students had not been to, or in some cases had heard of. So these shared experience led to discussion, as I mentioned before, that we came from a place of knowing. So learners were conscientious. They had to be. They had all these tasks to do. And this commitment led to learner autonomy. So I've just chosen a couple of things to show you from the students. This came from the week 1, and it was when they were asked in the recorded speaking reflections how they felt about the creative writing and how it made them feel. I'll just read one to you. Really nervous. I was watching what I was writing, then the ideas came. Then I remember everything, so I feel more confident. And if I can just show you another one, this is a different question. This was about what surprised you about the creative writing. And I think I'm going to choose, I'll choose the red one again for some reason. It's staring at me. My writing, I was happy because I never thought that I'm happy with writing, whatever, Korean or English, but I wrote English. It's nice and it impressed on me. And that's what I was thinking. I enjoy creative writing. I do it in my first language. These guys are doing it in their second language or their third language. So the peer interviews in week 5, again, were very rich in the information they provided, and also touched on the whole of this project. In the blue bubble, and I'll only read one, again, I don't want to go on a bit. So the blue bubble, the project was a challenge. Clearly, the student says it was. When I build the presentation, select the information, and finally, when I presented a good experience, I learned a lot and enjoyed the presentation. So, yeah, for me, the fact that we could ensure this scaffold of language learning and call it an assessment, that was everything. the formative speaking assessment presentations that the students did went far beyond assessment scores in terms of meaning. So much was coming out, so much, and there was so much. And not only that, it's this kind of, we get to know one another in the process. Voicing experience leads to learner autonomy. In this research, it did. It clearly did. Thank you. Thank you for listening, everyone.
Thanks, Sue. It's fascinating to hear your insights into the connections between creative writing and engaging and enjoyable presentations.
Thank you.
So if you have any questions for Sue, please do type them into the Q&A box. So we have a question here from Becky, and she'd like to know how you think your action research cycles will feed forward for your students' future studies.
Well, that's really interesting, Becky. Thank you for your question. Well, I wish I could be with them to see and tell you, but what I think probably it did was it opened up language learning to the point of giving a sense of the other and understanding that story is something that we all, of course, experience. And often we don't get a chance to share it, because it's not just about sharing it, it's about building confidence to feel that it's safe to do so. So I think if those students who are going forward and with their English studies, I hope that it's given them a voice, one that they're using in every opportunity. I can't say every single day, because I'm sure that that's not the case, but maybe it is the case.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, Becky's commented that she could see the impact of your work with the students because some of the students moved on to one of her classes.
That's great, Becky. Thank you again.
Okay. Well, I think that's it for the questions for you. So I'd like to once again thank our presenters, Sue Watson and Rose Harvey, for those really insightful and engaging presentations. I'd like to thank everyone for coming along today, and just remind you that tomorrow is the final day of the Action Research Colloquium. Thank you and have a lovely afternoon.